This crossroads was named after Molly Barry, who lived on the northern side of the Glanwood Road junction in the late 1800s. Molly Barry's husband was a blacksmith and worked at a forge located at these crossroads for a number of years until his death at an early age. Molly Barry ran a shebeen, or an unlicensed bar, for those who came to have their horses shod, and, indeed, for all those who passed by the way. On her husband's death, no blacksmith was available to shoe the many horses that travelled the roads of Kilworth. The nearest blacksmith operated at the Great House in Moor Park, formerly the domain of the Moors, Earls of Mount Cashel. As this blacksmith was fully occupied with the horses of the British Army based there at the time, Molly Barry decided to take up her husband's trade. She therefore became the first female blacksmith in North Cork. The name Kilworth is derived from Cill Uird and means the Church of the Order. It was founded in the 7th century by Saint Coleman, who was a disciple of Saint Muchoda of Lismore. The order referred to the ecclesiastical order that gave official assent to the Roman method of calculating Easter on a particular date. The order was adopted by Saint Coleman when he founded his church in Kilworth. Kilworth was listed as a market town as far back as 1299 AD and again in 1685 AD, and was acknowledged by writers of the time as a more important town than Fermoy. Being on the main Dublin to Cork route, Kilworth thrived in the 18th century, but fell into decline in the 19th century when Fermoy began to flourish. Like all rural villages of the time, Kilworth village consisted of houses with thatched roofs. These houses were very vulnerable to fire, and water from two streams that flowed on either side of the street was used to quench any fire outbreak. Certain guidelines were laid down, and the residents were fined for any misdemeanours, such as washing clothes in the stream or having uncleaned chimneys. The village contained many fine two-storey slate roof buildings built in the 19th century. Kilworth's most notable resident was David Richard Piggott, who became Chief Baron of the Irish Exchequer and was one of the foremost Irish judges of his day. He was born in Kilworth about 1796, son of John Piggott, a doctor. The market house was erected in the late 18th century on a site donated by Earl Mountcashel in 1787. Earl de Mountcashel also donated £100 towards the building costs. This beautiful building was used as a market house for agricultural produce. During the famine 1845 to 1847, the market house was used as an overflow facility to accommodate people from the workhouse in Fermoy. Gradually, the building fell into disrepair, and in 1979 it was purchased by Kilworth Community Council. Market days in Kilworth were usually held on a Friday, but when the nearby Fermoy town began to get established, the markets began to decline. Fair days were held on the 25th of January, also on Easter Tuesday, Corpus Christi Day, September the 11th, November the 21st, and December the 10th. A manor royal court was held in the village every 3 weeks for the recovery of debts under 40 shillings late currency with jurisdiction over the parish and parts of the parishes of Kilcrumper and Mucroney. The Church of Ireland in Kilworth is a typical rural church and was built in the late 18th or early 19th century. The Mount Cashels are buried in the adjacent graveyard. The Reverend Charles Seymour Langley undertook a major renovation and rebuilding programme during his ministry as rector in Kilworth between 1861 and 1885. He was responsible for building the present spire, and he re-roofed the main church and chancel and installed the stained glass windows. In 1885, Reverend Louis Fleury became rector and was the last resident rector in Kilworth. The Church of Ireland congregation declined rapidly in the 20th century, and finally the church was closed in November 1977. The church was then kindly donated to the local community council and initially was used to house the expanding vibrant craft centre. Later, the building was renovated and converted into what it is known today as the Arts Centre. A plaque erected on the wall of the Kilworth Arts Centre to the memory of Liam de Norred, 1888 to 1972, a noted Irish scholar and musician who objected strenuously to the term the green for the square, which had been the designation used by previous generations, and whose remains are interred in the adjacent graveyard. St. Martin's Catholic Church is an old barn-style design and was built by Father Burke, who was appointed parish priest here in Kilworth in 1789. It was completed sometime before 1800. It is one of the oldest churches in use in the Diocese of Clyne. The church is named in honour of St. Martin of Tours, for whom the Normans had a particular devotion. In the early 1830s, a school was built in the church grounds to educate the young people of Kilworth. The building is now used exclusively as a parochial hall. In the 19th century, the coach road was part of the main Cork to Dublin stagecoach road, which passed through the village of Kilworth and on towards Ballyporeen. Kilworth was a noted stopping stage for the Bianconi coaches, and the horses were changed at the market house. Many travellers regularly stayed at the local hotel. Coach and team of fresh horses continued along the coach road through the Kilworth Mountains and on to Dublin via the toll house, which still stands here at Glenduff. Due to the existence of highwaymen, this stretch of road was extremely hazardous for travellers. Willie Brennan is the best known and most celebrated highwayman in Irish history. He is the subject of the famous folk song Brennan on the Moor, which has been highly popular since the 19th century. Brennan was born near the Kilmurray townland close to Kilworth, and that before he became an outlaw, he had prior military service with the British Army. Desertion from the army may have been the initial reason that he went on the run. During and after his lifetime, he has been adopted as the Irish folk hero. Between 1804 and 1809, Brennan, armed with a blunderbuss, regularly held up coaches that travelled on the roads in North East Cork and South Tipperary. He was commonly aided by a sidekick named Paddy Hogan, known as the Peddler. They were able to evade detection by hiding in the expanses of the Kilworth and the Galtee Mountains, and also by receiving the goodwill of the ordinary people who refused to surrender Brennan for bounties on his whereabouts. Brennan, however, pushed his luck too far when, in early 1809, he began to harass a respected Quaker family that lived near Kerr in County Tipperary. He visited their property and robbed them 3 times, narrowly escaping capture on the first occasion. Brennan was likely returning for a 4th time when he and Hogan were spotted in a hedgerow in the vicinity of their house. The authorities were informed, and Lord Kerr, the local militia, and a detachment of British Army dragoons surrounded them. Hogan hid in a chimney of a house, while Brennan hid in a stack of hay. Both were discovered, detained, and put on trial in Clonmel. In March 1809, on a hill overlooking Clonmel, both were hanged. Huge crowds amassed in the town on that day under a heavy military presence. 'Tis of a brave young highwayman this story I will tell. His name was Willie Brennan, and in Ireland he did well. It was on the Kilworth Mountains he commenced his wild career, and many a wealthy nobleman before him shook with fear. Moor Park House was an immense square-built mansion, and was built by the Moors, who secured the title of Mount Cashel in 1766. Their Moor Park estate consisted of 900 acres and was enclosed by a high stone wall about 7 miles long, which is still standing on the perimeter of the Moor Park and Dairygold farms. In the rebellion of 1798, the fugitive leader of the United Irishmen, Lord Edward Fitzgerald, arrived unexpectedly at Moor Park House some weeks before the ill-fated rebellion began, and was sheltered by Margaret, Countess Mountcashel. When the British forces found out, a party of troops came in search of him. She conducted him to one of the cellars and then returned to entertain the redcoat visitors. The entertainment effectively ended the search, and after nightfall she helped Lord Edmund to escape. He was later captured in Dublin and died in prison. In the aftermath of the famine, the Mountcashels experienced great financial difficulty, and in 1903 were obliged to sell the estate. It was purchased by the British War Office and became an important training centre for British troops. Unfortunately, it was burned down in 1908, and no trace of the house exists today. Another aspect of Kilworth's military heritage includes the firing ranges, which are situated 4 kilometres north of the village of Kilworth and were opened in May 1896. The honour of firing the first shot went to Mrs. Fryer, wife of General Fryer, commander of the British Army in Cork. The ranges continue to operate as a premier training facility for the Irish Defence Forces. Cloghleigh Castle is the tall grey tower seen on the right as the road dips immediately after passing the agricultural premises at Moor Park, on the road from Fermoy to Mitchelstown, and just before the road turns west to Kilworth at Downing Bridge. This place was the scene of some battles in the War of 1641, and during the usurpation of Cromwell, by whom the manor was given to Fleetwood, whose name it still bears. The castle was the chief stronghold of the Condons, a warlike family descended from the Norman Condons, who had been given lands stretching from Fermoy to Mitchelstown, formerly belonging to the O'Keefes. If any of the Norman families could be said to become more Irish than the Irish in the school-worn expression, it could be said to have been these Condons, in that they became integrated into the life of the country and found themselves on the Irish side on most occasions. Patrick Condon, who had been involved with the Earl of Desmond's rebellion, was forced to forfeit the castle and manor on September the 9th, 1588, to a Thomas Fleetwood. On surrendering the castle, the entire Fleetwood garrison was murdered, wounded or imprisoned. Patrick Condon took residence at the castle, but his ownership was short-lived. On the 3rd of June 1643, Sir Charles Vavasour marched on Condon's castle. After an obstinate defence, the castle was taken by the English. In the castle resided Condon's party of 20 men, 11 women and 7 children. They were ordered to strip and were then murdered by the English army with carbines, pistols and swords. The very next day, on the fields in front of the castle, the English army of Sir Charles Vavasour, 200 musketeers commanded by Captain Philip Hutton and a troop led by Captain Frick advanced on the Irish army close by. When the Irish forces saw the English marching through a narrow lane between the hill and Fermoy, they charged them in the rear with brutal consequences. Sir Charles Vavasour, Captain Wind and Captain Fitzmaurice, Captain George Butler and Lieutenants Walter St. Ledger, Stradbury, Blessington and Kent, and several other officers were killed, with at least 300 English soldiers. The Earl of Castlehaven, who commanded the Irish, claimed that they had slain 690 English soldiers that day. Wrapped in a history of murder and cruel war, Cloghleigh Castle still stands today, the surrounding trees and green fields giving little indication of its grim and bloody past. The castle is a splendid example of late-style Norman building of the 15th-16th century. It is of 7 stories, including the watchtowers. The first level is occupied by the basement, from where an underground tunnel was said to run to the Funcheon River. The first floor timber joists are still in position, but the floor has gone. There is a nicely arched door to the second floor, on which the earthen floor over an arch is still in position. Here there are spacious rooms, a plain fireplace and a number of shelves. There are 3 steps to a small room with a horizontal oak, one of several in the building. Above there are large corbels, but the joists have gone. An embrasured slit window is to the south. The 3rd floor has a wide arched entry and a corridor to a garderobe. From here, a straight stairs succeed the spiral staircase and continue to the top floor, where there is a small fireplace. There is a fine carved arch to OG double-headed windows to the south, with matching windowless arches at either side. A pointed roof covered this floor, which is now grassed and open to the elements. The entry to the battlements is complicated, and that to the very high watchtower blocked off nowadays for safety. Cloghleigh Castle, or Kilworth Castle as it's better known, is a fine example of a defensive tower of the period. Built on a massive rock over a bend in the River Funcheon, which adjoins the Black Water near Halahan's Rock, about 3 miles to the south. In part of the domain known as the Castle Field, numerous copper and silver coins and some human remains were found in the early 19th century. Visiting Cloghleigh Castle on a bright sunny day like today, who would guess that 2 entire garrisons of this castle had been murdered over a fight for its ownership, and an English army slain right in these very fields. There were 20 mills on the banks of the River Funcheon, the principal of which was the Maryville Flour Mill, the property of Lawrence Coleman, Esquire, generally employing 20 to 30 men and producing annually about 12,000 barrels of flour. There was also a flax mill belonging to Dr. Collett. Today, Moor Park is occupied by An Forras Taluntish, with the Mitchelstown Co-op Society, who have a pig rearing station on the site of the big house at Moor Park. We have much to learn from history. It gives us a sense of perspective. It tells us where we came from and explains how things came about. In short, it opens our eyes.